primary reason for vascular inflammation for the majority of people that have problems is insulin resistance and the inflammation that blood glucose causes. A hemoglobin A1C results from blood glucose attaching to hemoglobin. That's how you get that percentage, that number, whether it's 5.7 or 6.3 or whatever. But that glucose is also attaching to the lining of your arteries, and it's attaching to your cartilage as well, causing inflammation. And so I think for the majority of people, that inflammatory focus is a much bigger issue than cholesterol. And I think we're getting more and more information these days about cholesterol and the degree to which it's harmful. And I don't know, have you got in your previous program, have you talked about cholesterol subunits at all and the different types of cholesterol as opposed to just cholesterol as a monolithic problem in and of itself?
Yes, we have.
Okay, so again, I think people, if they have a little bit of a high cholesterol, they need to be knowing what their subfractions are of cholesterol. Basically that comes down to the LDL type, whether it's the small, more inflammatory ping pong ball, if you will, type versus the large fluffy type of LDL. Because a mildly elevated cholesterol, it really can often not be any significant issue at all. And I'm not completely opposed to looking at cholesterol and, people being on statins. I think that has its place. I refer people to a lipidologist previously, but again, I think the main event is insulin resistance, both in terms of metabolic health and weight gain.
Yeah. And I know on this podcast, and when I'm working with students and they show me their lipid panel, I'm always keen in on the triglycerides and the HDL and looking at that ratio, because as insulin resistance progresses, so does an increase in the triglycerides. And so we look at the triglyceride to HDL ratio, and I always look at that to be less than 1.5. And if it's not, I'm like, you have some work, you have some work to do
Right. Yeah.
metabolically. And yeah, it's like
Well,
they've used that 200 mark as cholesterol. And my 20-year-old daughter just got some labs done a few weeks ago, and I think her cholesterol came back like 207, but her HDL was like in the 80s, and her
good.
triglycerides are like 40 in 50 maybe. I'm like, don't you ever let anybody tell you that you need to worry about your total cholesterol, because what is actually important looks stellar. So
Yeah. Is she low carb with that low
yeah,
triglyceride?
she is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing that has amazed me through my practice that I don't know if people have a lot of insight into is the way triglycerides plummet when you go on a low carb diet. Because, triglycerides are formed from the conversion of blood glucose to fat in the liver. And if you lower your blood glucose, which of course is going to help reverse your insulin resistance, your triglycerides plummet. I'm still surprised at that sometimes with new patients that they'll come in and they'll have an initial triglyceride at 240 and they'll go low carb for 8 weeks and all of a sudden their triglyceride will be 65 or something like that. So I think that's a big piece of the puzzle as well.
Absolutely. And it's kind of like an inverse relationship. You'd almost expect the opposite, but it's really, you see it time and time again. And yeah, when you see it on paper, that's that's really helpful.